The chandelier light fractured across 500 faces the moment Sable Ashford stepped through the doors of her mother's ballroom. Not hers anymore. Not for 3 months now. But the sharp scent of jasmine from the conservatory still knew her name, and the portraits lining the walls still watched her with familiar eyes. She had not been invited. The orchestra stumbled. Violins screeched into silence. Conversations collapsed like dominoes until the entire room held its breath. Sable kept walking. Her dress was 3 seasons old, mended twice at the hem, and she wore no jewels except her mother's wedding ring hidden beneath her glove. But she lifted her chin and moved through the crowd like she still owned every inch of this marble floor, because once she had. He stood at the far end of the ballroom, beneath the portrait of her grandfather. Corvin Marchand, Duke of Ashworth, the man who had purchased her family's shame for pennies on the pound, then stripped what remained through lawyers and ledgers and cold, calculated patience. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair swept back from a face carved from winter itself. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes the color of storm clouds gathering before violence. Those gray eyes found her across the ballroom, locked onto her with an intensity that made her stomach clench. He did not look surprised. He looked curious. "Miss Ashford?" His voice cut through the silence like a blade, deep, unhurried, carrying the absolute authority of a man who had never once been denied anything he wanted. "I don't recall your name on the guest list." "That would be difficult, Your Grace." Sable stopped 10 feet from him, close enough to see the slight narrowing of his eyes, far enough to maintain the pretense of propriety. "Since you've made it abundantly clear that Ashfords are no longer welcome in their own home." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped. A woman in diamonds clutched her companion's arm as if Sable had drawn a weapon. Perhaps she had. Words could wound deeper than steel, and she'd been sharpening hers for months. "Your father's debts transferred ownership quite legally," Corvin said, his tone almost bored. "Heartwood Manor belongs to me, as does everything in it." "Everything." Sable let the word hang between them, poisonous and precise. "Including my mother's portrait? The one you've hung in your private study, I'm told. A curious choice for a man who never met her." His expression flickered. So brief she might have imagined it. A crack in that perfect marble facade. "Gossip travels quickly among the dispossessed," he observed. "Truth travels faster, Your Grace. Tell me, do you look at her face while you calculate how much more you can squeeze from our misfortune? Does it comfort you to own the image of a woman while her daughter counts pennies for bread?" Now the gasps were audible. A woman fainted or pretended to. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for scandal, for blood, for the spectacle of a ruined girl daring to challenge a duke in his own stolen ballroom. Corvin's jaw tightened. "You forget yourself, Miss Ashford." "I forget nothing." Sable's voice shook with fury she no longer bothered to hide. "I remember every painting you seized, every book, every gown, every silver spoon that generations of my family treasured. I remember my father's face when he signed away our legacy, and I remember your solicitor smiling as he watched." She stepped closer, close enough to smell cedar and smoke and something darker beneath his expensive cologne, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. "You are a vulture, Your Grace. You feast on other people's grief and call it business. You strip families to the bone and host balls in their corpses, and everyone in this room knows it." Silence. Perfect, crystalline silence. Then Corvin smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Sable had ever seen. Not cruel exactly, but calculating, as if she'd just revealed something he'd been waiting to see. "Are you finished?" he asked softly. "I've barely begun." "Then perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. unless you'd prefer to air your grievances until dawn while my guests watch." He gestured lazily toward the crowd. "They do seem entertained." Sable's face burned. She hadn't planned past this moment, hadn't thought beyond the satisfaction of confronting him, of saying aloud what everyone whispered behind closed doors. Now she stood in a ballroom full of strangers, having just destroyed whatever remained of her reputation, with no clear path to victory or escape. Private conversations with unmarried women? A new voice cut through the tension, light and amused. "How scandalous, brother. What would grandmother say?" A young woman appeared at Corvin's side, dark hair like his, but with warmth in her brown eyes that he completely lacked. She wore pale lavender silk and a smile that seemed genuine despite the chaos surrounding them. "Grandmother would say many things," Corvin replied flatly. "None of them appropriate for polite company." Fortunately, polite company left approximately 30 seconds ago. The young woman extended her hand to Sable. "I'm Imogen Marchand. You must be the Ashford girl. Father used to speak of your family quite fondly before everything happened." Sable stared at the offered hand, uncertain whether this was rescue or trap. "Miss Ashford was just leaving," Corvin said. "Miss Ashford was just being invited to stay." Imogen's smile sharpened. "Unless you'd prefer she tell this story to every drawing room in London tomorrow? Because she will. And the version without your response will be considerably less flattering." The siblings stared at each other. Some silent battle waged between them. Then Corvin turned back to Sable, and something in his expression had shifted. Still cold, but beneath it, something that looked almost like respect. "It seems you've been offered hospitality, Miss Ashford." His voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. "I suggest you take it, because the alternative involves consequences you're not prepared to face." He walked away before she could respond, the crowd parting around him like water around stone. Sable stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. What had she done? Imogen guided her through a side door before Sable could fully process what had happened. The corridor was quieter, lit by flickering candles. She'd played in this hallway as a child, hiding behind the curtains during her parents' parties. Now it felt like enemy territory. "You're either very brave or very stupid," Imogen said conversationally. "I haven't decided which." "Neither have I." Imogen laughed, and the sound was so unexpected that Sable nearly stumbled. "I like you already. Most people who challenge Corvin end up weeping or apologizing within minutes. You just called him a vulture in front of half the peerage." "He is a vulture. Perhaps." Imogen's expression grew more serious. "But he's also a duke with considerable influence, a vindictive streak when provoked, and solicitors who could bury your family under litigation for decades. Your father's debts were legal. Whatever you feel about how Corvin acquired them doesn't change the paperwork." Sable's hands clenched at her sides. "My father was tricked. The man who held his gambling markers, Lord Pemberton, he cheated. Everyone knows it. Knowing and proving are different beasts." Imogen opened a door into a small sitting room, mercifully empty. "Lord Pemberton died 6 weeks after selling those markers to Corvin. Very convenient timing, some would say." Sable whirled to face her. "Are you suggesting your brother?" "I'm suggesting nothing." Imogen settled into a chair with practiced grace. "I'm simply providing context. My brother collects things, Miss Ashford. Properties, investments, debts, people who interest him. You have just made yourself very interesting." Before Sable could respond, the door opened again. A woman entered like a queen, surveying conquered territory. Blonde hair in perfect curls, sapphires dripping from her throat, a gown of rose silk that cost more than Sable's family had spent on clothing in 3 years. "Lady Venetia Hargrave, the Earl of Dunmore's daughter," rumored to be Corvin's intended. So this is the creature causing such disruption. Venetia's gaze swept over Sable with obvious disdain. I expected someone more impressive. Lady Venetia. Imogen's voice cooled noticeably. What a surprise. Hardly a surprise. When a street urchin invades one's future home, one naturally investigates. Venetia circled Sable slowly, examining her like livestock at auction. The dress is tragic, the hair is provincial, and those hands. Have you been scrubbing floors, Miss Ashford? Sable refused to hide her work-roughened fingers. I've been surviving, Lady Venetia. Something I suspect you've never had to do. Venetia's perfect smile didn't waver. Survival is for the common. Thriving is for those of us with proper breeding. She stopped directly in front of Sable. Let me be clear, since you seem confused about your position. Corvin Marchand will be my husband. Heartwood Manor will be my country residence. And you will be a forgotten footnote in a minor scandal that no one remembers by next season. The Duke hasn't proposed to you yet, Imogen observed mildly. I keep waiting for the announcement, but somehow it never comes. Strange, isn't it? Fury flashed across Venetia's features. The Duke knows his duty. Our families have an understanding. Understandings can change. Not this one. Venetia turned back to Sable, her voice dropping to something poisonous and intimate. I don't know what you're hoping to accomplish here, little pauper. Perhaps you imagine some fairy tale where the Duke falls for your poverty-stricken charms. Let me disabuse you of that fantasy. Corvin Marchand doesn't fall. He calculates. He acquires. He uses people until they're no longer useful, then discards them without a backward glance. Then you should be very worried, Sable said quietly, because from where I'm standing, you seem like someone desperately trying to be useful enough to keep. The slap came fast and hard. Sable's head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned, but she didn't cry out, didn't stagger, didn't give Venetia the satisfaction of any visible reaction. She simply turned back, met those furious blue eyes, and smiled. That's the second time tonight someone has shown me exactly who they are. Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. I should thank you both for the clarity. You insolent little... That's enough. Corvin's voice cut through the room like a whip. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes fixed on Venetia's raised hand, with something that might have been disgust. Your Grace. Venetia immediately softened, all honey and contrition. I was simply explaining to Miss Ashford why her presence here is inappropriate. She became hysterical, and I was forced to calm her. I saw what you were forced to do. Corvin stepped into the room, and the temperature seemed to drop. I suggest you return to the ballroom, Lady Venetia. Your mother is looking for you. But surely... Now. Venetia's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. She shot Sable one last venomous look, then swept from the room with what dignity she could muster. Corvin closed the door behind her. Miss Ashford. He turned to face her, and Sable braced herself for whatever punishment he'd devised. It seems we need to discuss terms. Terms. Sable repeated the word carefully, as if testing for hidden blades. Terms for what? Corvin moved to the fireplace, bracing one arm against the mantel. The flames cast shifting shadows across his features, making him look less like a duke and more like something older. Darker. You've created a rather spectacular situation, he said. Half the ton just watched you accuse me of predatory business practices in my own ballroom. By tomorrow morning, that story will have spread to every drawing room in London. By next week, it will be established fact. Good. Sable lifted her chin. Let them know what you are. What I am is a man who despises scandal. his gray eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. What you've done is guarantee that my name will be linked with yours for the foreseeable future. Every time someone mentions the Duke of Ashworth, they'll also mention the Ashford girl who publicly defied him. Then deny it, call me mad, have me thrown out. I could. He turned to face her fully. I could also pursue legal action for defamation. Your father's remaining assets are minimal, but they exist. A cottage in Devon, I believe. Some personal effects, enough to make litigation worth my solicitor's time. Sable's blood ran cold. The cottage was all they had left. Her mother lived there now, tending a small garden, pretending they hadn't lost everything. You wouldn't. I would prefer not to. Corvin's tone remained maddeningly calm. Which brings us to terms. Imogen had been watching silently, but now she leaned forward. Corvin, whatever you're planning, is between Miss Ashford and myself. He didn't look at his sister. Though you're welcome to witness the negotiation. You seem to have appointed yourself her advocate. Someone needs to be. Imogen crossed her arms. You have that look, the one you get before you do something dramatic and ill-advised. I never do anything ill-advised. The faintest trace of dark humor touched his voice. I simply make decisions others fail to understand, until later. He crossed to a writing desk, withdrew a folded document, and extended it toward Sable. What is this? She didn't take it. Your father's remaining debts, not to me, but to various creditors circling your family since the collapse. Merchants, tailors, a persistent wine merchant threatening legal action. Corvin set the document on a small table. I acquired them this afternoon. All of them. Sable's stomach dropped. Why? Because I anticipated you might do something exactly like what you did tonight. Your brother has been rather indiscreet about your intentions. He drinks too much and talks too freely. Everard. Of course, her brother meant well, but his loose tongue had caused problems before. So you own all my family's debts now. Sable's voice came out hollow. Every last one. And if I don't cooperate with whatever scheme you're proposing, you'll destroy us completely. I'm offering to eliminate them. Corvin's gaze held hers. Every debt erased. Your family restored to solvency. The cottage secured. Your mother's comfort guaranteed for the remainder of her life. The offer hung in the air, too good to be anything but dangerous. In exchange for what? Your presence, here at Heartwood Manor, for the remainder of the season. He paused, letting the words land. As my sister's guest and companion, and as my very public romantic interest. Sable stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. Imogen made a strangled sound. Corvin, this is insane even by your standards. It's practical. He didn't look away from Sable. Lady Venetia believes our match is inevitable. My grandmother has been pressuring me to propose for months. The entire ton expects an announcement any day, and I have no intention of making one. Then simply refuse her. Refusing isn't enough. Venetia is tenacious, well-connected, and utterly convinced of her eventual success. The only way to end her campaign is to present an alternative. Someone she can't dismiss as merely a passing distraction. And you think I'm that alternative? Sable laughed bitterly. A ruined merchant's daughter, with no fortune, no connections, and no reputation left after tonight. You're perfect precisely because of tonight. Something shifted in his expression. You publicly challenged me. You stood your ground against Venetia. You refused to cower, even when every rational calculation suggested you should. That's not the behavior of someone easily dismissed. That's the behavior of someone who would fight for a duke's attention against all odds. This is ridiculous. This is an opportunity, Corvin stepped closer. 3 months. Attend events at my side. Allow society to believe I'm courting you. When the season ends, we'll stage a mutual parting. You'll leave with references that will open doors throughout England. A settlement that ensures your family's comfort. And the satisfaction of knowing Lady Venetia will have spent an entire season watching me choose you over her. The satisfaction. He knew exactly what bait to dangle. Sable thought of Venetia's cruel smile, her casual slap, her certainty that Sable was nothing, thought of what it would mean to spend months making that woman doubt everything she believed about her own future. It was petty, vindictive, beneath her. It was also desperately tempting. 3 conditions, she heard herself say. Corvin's eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with me. You need me to make this believable. That gives me leverage. Sable straightened her spine. First, my mother is told nothing of this arrangement. She receives a letter explaining I've accepted a position as Lady Imogen's companion. Respectable, truthful enough, and sparing her any worry about schemes or scandals. Agreed. Second, when this ends, I want introductions. Not just references, actual introductions to families seeking governesses or companions. Families who will judge me on my abilities, not my father's failures. Corvin glanced at his sister. Imogen nodded slowly, a smile beginning to form. Agreed, he said. Third, Sable met his eyes directly. The moment you decide to actually marry, whether it's Lady Venetia or anyone else, this ends immediately. I won't be played as a fool. I won't be discarded publicly while you pursue someone behind my back. If your intentions change, you tell me first. Before anyone else. And we end this with my dignity intact. Silence stretched between them. Then Corvin extended his hand. Not the formal bow a gentleman would offer a lady. A handshake. The kind exchanged between equals striking a bargain. You have my word. All 3 conditions. His gray eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. Do we have an agreement? Sable looked at his outstretched hand, at the document containing her family's debts, at Imogen, who watched with something between excitement and concern. She thought of her mother in that cramped cottage, her brother drowning his guilt in taverns, her father, broken and silent, barely eating some days. She thought of Lady Venetia's smug certainty that Sable was nothing. She took his hand. We have an agreement. His grip was warm and firm, sealing something that felt far more dangerous than a simple bargain. Imogen clapped her hands together. This is going to be magnificent. Grandmother will be absolutely furious, which means I'm going to enjoy every moment. Who is your grandmother? Sable asked, suddenly wary. Corvin's expression flickered. Someone you'll meet tomorrow. I'd suggest getting some rest, Miss Ashford. You're going to need it. He released her hand and left without another word. Sable stood in the sitting room of her former home, having just agreed to pretend to be courted by the man who'd taken everything from her family. She wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life, or walked straight into a trap she couldn't yet see. Imogen squeezed her arm gently. Don't look so terrified. Corvin is many things, but he keeps his word. Once given, it's iron. That's not what terrifies me, Sable admitted. Then what does? But Sable couldn't answer, because what terrified her most was the way her hand still tingled from his touch, the way her heart had raced when he'd stepped close, the way she'd wanted, for just one moment, for this to be real. That was the truly dangerous part, and she had 3 months to survive it. The room they gave her was the one she'd slept in as a child. Sable stood in the doorway, unable to move. The wallpaper had changed from soft pink roses to sage green. The furniture was different, but the window still looked out over the garden where she'd learned to walk, and the fireplace still had that small chip where she dropped a poker at age 7. Miss? The maid hovering behind her shifted nervously. Is something wrong? Everything was wrong, standing in her childhood home as a guest, as a prop in some elaborate scheme. It's fine. Sable forced herself to step inside. Thank you. Thora, miss. The maid was young, perhaps 18, with copper hair pinned beneath a crisp white cap and freckles scattered across her nose. I've been assigned as your lady's maid for the duration of your stay. Lady Imogen's orders. Lady Imogen is very thoughtful. She is, miss. The whole household adores her. Thora moved to the wardrobe, opening it to reveal a row of dresses Sable didn't recognize. These arrived this afternoon. His Grace had them commissioned from a modiste in London. Said you'd need appropriate attire immediately. Sable stared at the gowns, silk and satin and fine muslin, in colors that would complement her dark hair and pale complexion. More dresses than she'd owned in the past 3 years combined. He'd anticipated this, anticipated her arrival, her agreement, her need. The realization made her skin prickle with unease. The blue would be lovely for tomorrow's breakfast, Thora continued, oblivious to Sable's discomfort. Though the ivory might be better if you're meeting the Dowager Duchess. She has opinions about first impressions. The Dowager Duchess? Thora's face paled slightly. His Grace's grandmother. She arrived this evening, miss. Unexpected, from what I hear. The household is in quite a state. Of course, the grandmother Corvin had mentioned, the one he'd warned her about with that cryptic suggestion to rest. What is she like? Sable asked carefully. Thora hesitated, clearly weighing loyalty against honesty. She's formidable, miss. Very traditional. Very particular about family honor and proper behavior. A pause. Very unhappy about Lady Venetia being dismissed from the ball this evening. Sable's stomach tightened. Lady Venetia is connected to the Dowager? They're quite close, miss. Lady Venetia has been the Dowager's choice for His Grace since before the old Duke died. Thora bit her lip. I probably shouldn't have said that. Please don't tell anyone. I won't. Sable managed a reassuring smile. Thank you for being honest with me. I suspect I'll need all the honesty I can get in the coming weeks. Thora relaxed slightly. You seem different from what I expected, miss. The way people talked about the Ashfords after... Well, she flushed. I shouldn't say more. After my father lost everything gambling. You can say it. I've heard worse. I just meant that you're kind, miss. Not everyone would thank a maid for gossip. Thora moved toward the door. I'll bring up some tea and something to eat. You must be exhausted. When she left, Sable sank onto the edge of the bed. The mattress was softer than anything she'd slept on in months. The sheets smelled of lavender, exactly as her mother used to insist upon. She pressed her hands to her face and tried to breathe. This was temporary. A performance. 3 months of playing a role, and then she'd leave with references and security and the satisfaction of having survived. But sitting here in her old room, surrounded by expensive gifts from the man who owned her family's shame, Sable felt less like a survivor and more like a prisoner in a gilded cage. The cage just happened to be built from memories. She walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. The roses her mother had planted still bloomed along the south wall. The fountain where she'd learned to skip stones still caught starlight in its basin. Tomorrow she would face the Dowager Duchess. Tomorrow she would begin pretending to be courted by Corvin Marchand. Tomorrow her life would become an elaborate lie, performed for an audience of hundreds. But tonight, just for a moment, she let herself remember what it felt like to belong here. It hurt more than she'd expected. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Thora, probably, with the promised tea. Sable wiped her eyes quickly and called, "Come in." But it wasn't Thora who opened the door. It was Imogen, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She carried a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "You looked like you could use this," she said simply, "and some company that won't interrogate you about your intentions toward my brother." Sable almost laughed. "Almost. Is that what tomorrow will bring?" "Tomorrow will bring grandmother in full Inquisition mode. She's already demanded a private audience with Corvin, which is currently happening in the study and involves quite a lot of shouting." Imogen settled onto the window seat, pouring wine with practiced ease. "I thought you might like advance warning." "What exactly should I be warned about?" Imogen handed her a glass. "Everything." The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth received Sable in the morning room at precisely 10 o'clock. Sable had dressed carefully in the ivory gown Thora recommended, her mother's ring hidden beneath her gloves. She'd eaten nothing, too nervous to stomach food. None of it prepared her for Meridia Marchand. The Dowager sat in a high-backed chair positioned to catch the morning light, a deliberate effect that created a halo around her silver hair while leaving visitors fully exposed. She wore black silk, diamonds at her throat, and an expression that could have frozen the Thames in July. "So," the single syllable cut through the room like a blade. "You are the Ashford girl." Sable curtsied precisely. "Yes, Your Grace." "The one who publicly accused my grandson of predatory business practices in front of 500 witnesses?" "Yes, Your Grace." "The one whose father gambled away 3 generations of family legacies in a single night of spectacular stupidity." Sable's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "My father made poor decisions while in the grip of an illness he didn't understand. But yes, that is my family history. An illness." The Dowager's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Is that what we're calling it now? How convenient. How modern." "It's what I call it, Your Grace. Others may use harsher terms." "Others certainly do." The Dowager gestured to a chair across from her. "Sit. You're making my neck ache looking up at you." Sable sat, keeping her spine straight, and her hands folded in her lap. The Dowager studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes, so like Corvin's, missing nothing. "You have good posture," she observed. "Your mother's doing, I assume. Helena Ashford was always particular about deportment." "You knew my mother." "We debuted the same season. She was considered the great beauty of our year." A flicker crossed the Dowager's expression. "She married beneath her, of course. Your father was charming, but weak. I told her so at the time. I'm sure she appreciated your candor." "She did not. We argued quite bitterly. Then she stopped speaking to me altogether." The Dowager's gaze sharpened. "Tell me, does she know you're here? Playing pretend courtship with the man who owns her former home?" "She believes I'm serving as Lady Imogen's companion, which is technically true." "Technically." The word dripped with disdain. "And when this charade ends, when you've served your purpose and my grandson discards you, what will you tell her then? That I made choices to secure our family's future, that I did what was necessary." "Necessary." The Dowager rose, moving to the window, with the careful grace of someone managing old injuries. "Do you know why Corvin acquired your father's debts, Miss Ashford? The real reason, not the convenient story about strategic investments." Sable's heart stuttered. "I assumed it was simply profitable. My grandson has more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Profit is not his primary motivation." The Dowager turned back, her expression unreadable. "He acquired those debts because of guilt." "Guilt?" "The man who cheated your father at cards, Lord Pemberton." The name fell like a stone into still water. "He was Corvin's business partner. They were developing properties together throughout London. When Pemberton needed funds for a personal investment, Corvin suggested finding investors through unconventional channels. Sable felt the blood drain from her face. You're saying the Duke was involved in what happened to my father? I'm saying Corvin introduced Pemberton to a gambling circle where wealthy, desperate men could be separated from their fortunes efficiently. He didn't know Pemberton would cheat. He didn't know your father would be targeted specifically. But when he discovered what had happened, the Dowager's voice hardened. Pemberton died 3 weeks later. Hunting accident. Very convenient as these things go. The room seemed to tilt. Sable gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process what she was hearing. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you've walked into. The Dowager returned to her chair, settling with a rustle of silk. My grandson is not a villain, Miss Ashford. He is not the monster you accused him of being in that ballroom. He is a man trying to atone for a mistake that destroyed innocent people, and he's been trying for 3 years without success. Atone by taking everything we had left? Atone by ensuring those assets went to someone who would care for them, by purchasing every debt before harsher creditors could, by maintaining this estate exactly as your family kept it, down to your mother's roses in the garden. The Dowager's eyes held hers. He didn't have to do any of that. He chose to. Sable didn't know what to feel. The anger that had sustained her for months, now tangled with confusion, with something that might have been understanding. Why didn't he simply tell me? Apologize directly? Because apologizing would require admitting what he did. And admitting what he did would mean facing that he cannot fix it. The Dowager shook her head slowly. My grandson is brilliant with numbers, with strategy, with the cold calculations of business. But emotions, vulnerability, he'd rather cut off his own hand than admit to either. That's not my problem to solve. No, but it might become your opportunity. The Dowager leaned forward slightly. I came here intending to destroy you, Miss Ashford, to expose this scheme and have you removed from my grandson's life before you could cause further damage. What changed your mind? You did. Sitting there with your spine straight and your chin raised, listening to information that should have broken you without shedding a single tear. Something that might have been approval flickered in her eyes. Helena's daughter indeed. Sable didn't trust herself to speak. I won't oppose this arrangement, the Dowager continued. Not because I approve. Lady Venetia remains far more suitable in every measurable way, but because Corvin needs disruption. He's been drowning in guilt and duty for 3 years, performing his role without actually living. Perhaps you'll force him to feel something genuine. Perhaps you'll fail spectacularly. Either way, it will be more interesting than watching him slowly calcify into his father's ghost. I'm not here to save your grandson, Your Grace. No, you're here to save yourself. That's precisely why you might succeed where others have failed. The Dowager rose, signaling the interview's end. One warning, Miss Ashford. If you deliberately hurt him, if you exploit his guilt or manipulate his emotions for personal gain, I will ensure you never work as anything more than a scullery maid for the rest of your days. Do we understand each other? Sable stood, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. The Dowager moved toward the door, then paused. He keeps your mother's portrait in his study because he cannot bear to move it. Your mother still lives, I know. But the woman in that portrait, radiant, secure, mistress of this house, that woman was lost the night your father signed away everything. Corvin sees that loss every time he looks at her painted smile. You might consider what that means before you judge him too harshly. She left without waiting for a response. Sable stood alone in the morning room, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture in her familiar childhood home. Everything she thought she knew, crumbling into something far more complicated. Corvin Marchand wasn't just the man who'd taken her family's legacy. He was the man who blamed himself for destroying it. And she had 3 months to decide what to do with that knowledge. The next 5 days passed in a blur of fittings, lessons, and carefully orchestrated chaos. Madame Lisette, the modiste Corvin commissioned, descended on Heartwood Manor with an army of assistants. She circled Sable with pins in her mouth, declaring her figure acceptable and her coloring workable. "The burgundy for the Thornwood Ball," Madame Lisette commanded. "The deep green brings out her eyes. Save that for maximum impact." "Maximum impact for what?" Sable asked. "For when Lady Venetia needs reminding that she's lost." Imogen appointed herself as Sable's guide to society's treacherous waters, providing endless instruction on who mattered and who merely thought they did. "The Countess of Blackmere will test you with backhanded compliments," Imogen warned during one afternoon session. "The trick is to accept them so graciously, she can't tell if you're oblivious or devastating. Lady Whitmore gossips to anyone who'll listen, so feed her only what you want, repeated. And whatever you do, don't mention Lord Ashby's second wife. There was an incident with a fountain and a small dog. No one speaks of it. How do you keep all of this straight? Practice, terror, and an excellent memory for grudges." Imogen grinned. "You'll be fine. You have something most society ladies lack entirely. Poverty and desperation? Backbone. It's shockingly rare." Through it all, Corvin remained a distant presence. He appeared at meals, exchanged brief pleasantries, and retreated to his study with the single-minded focus of a man avoiding something uncomfortable. Sable told herself this was preferable, professional. Exactly what their arrangement required. It didn't explain why she noticed the shadows under his eyes, or the way he sometimes paused in doorways, watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. On the 6th day, she found herself unable to sleep. Memories kept surfacing unbidden. Her father teaching her to play chess in the library. Her mother arranging flowers in the conservatory. Birthday parties in the garden with cakes shaped like swans. This house held her entire childhood, and walking its halls felt like being haunted by her own past. At midnight, she gave up on rest and went searching for something to read. The library doors were open, warm light spilling into the corridor. Sable hesitated, suddenly aware of her dressing gown and unbound hair. But curiosity won over propriety, and she stepped inside. Corvin sat in a leather chair by the dying fire, a glass of whiskey forgotten beside him, papers scattered across his lap. He'd removed his jacket and cravat, his shirt open at the collar, in a way that made him seem almost human, almost approachable. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or the strange discomfort of being caught without armor. "Miss Ashford." His voice was rougher than usual. "It's late. I couldn't sleep." She should leave, should apologize for the intrusion and retreat to her room like a proper lady. Instead, she moved toward the shelves, trailing her fingers across familiar spines. "This collection hasn't changed much." It was already exceptional. I saw no reason to alter it. My father spent 30 years building it. He used to say books were the only reliable companions. They never disappointed you unless you disappointed yourself by not finishing them. A wise observation. He was wise about many things, just not the things that mattered most. Sable pulled out a volume at random. Poetry, her mother's favorite. "Your grandmother told me why you really acquired our debts." The silence that followed was absolute. She turned to face him, the book clutched against her chest like a shield. "She told me about Lord Pemberton, about the gambling circle, about your involvement." Corvin's expression shuddered completely. "My grandmother speaks too freely." "Your grandmother wanted me to understand." Sable moved closer, driven by something she couldn't name. 3 years. You've spent 3 years trying to atone for something you couldn't have predicted. I introduced Pemberton to those men. I gave him the connections he needed to destroy your family. The fact that I didn't anticipate his methods doesn't absolve me of responsibility for the outcome. His voice was flat, reciting facts. Your father lost everything because I was careless about whom I trusted. My father lost everything because he couldn't walk away from a card table. Sable sat in the chair across from him. Propriety be damned. You didn't force him to play. You didn't force him to keep betting after he'd already lost more than he could afford. Pemberton cheated, yes, but my father chose to be there. Chose to risk what he couldn't lose. You're defending him? I'm assigning blame accurately. She met his eyes, those gray depths that had seemed so cold when she first confronted him. They didn't seem cold now. They seemed exhausted. What Pemberton did was criminal. What you did was careless. What my father did was foolish. None of those are the same thing. It doesn't change the outcome. No. But it changes how I see you. She looked down at the book in her hands, her mother's favorite poems, probably untouched since they'd lost the house. I came here hating you. I wanted you to be a villain because it was easier than accepting that my father destroyed himself, that we let him. Sable. He said her name for the first time. Not Miss Ashford. Sable. It sounded different in his voice, softer. I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm not sure forgiveness is mine to give. She looked up again. But I understand now, and I think maybe that's enough to start with. The fire crackled between them, shadows dancing across his features. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Corvin reached for something on the side table and extended it toward her, a small leather journal, worn at the edges. This was with your father's personal effects. The solicitors thought it was worthless. I kept it because... He stopped, seeming uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. It seemed like something someone should have. Sable took the journal with trembling hands. She recognized it immediately. Her father's personal diary, the one he'd written in every night before bed. She'd assumed it was lost with everything else. You kept this for 3 years? I kept everything I thought might matter to someone someday. His voice was quiet. The portrait of your mother. Your childhood books. A box of letters your parents exchanged during their courtship. They're stored in the attic. I didn't know what else to do with them. Tears pricked at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Why didn't you return them? Pride. Cowardice. The certainty that your family would rather burn everything than accept anything from me. He almost smiled. I wasn't wrong, apparently. You did break into my ball to call me a vulture. A laugh escaped her, surprising them both. I stand by that assessment. Fair enough. His smile was genuine now, small but real. I've been called worse. By whom? My grandmother, mostly. She has a remarkable vocabulary when provoked. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire warming the space between them. Sable paged through her father's journal, recognizing his handwriting, his observations, his small daily joys recorded before everything fell apart. Thank you, she said finally, for keeping these. For this. She gestured vaguely at the library, the house, the complicated arrangement that had brought her here. Don't thank me yet. The Thornwood Ball is in 3 days. Society is going to be watching every move we make. His expression grew serious again. This will be difficult, Sable. People will say terrible things. Lady Venetia will do everything in her power to humiliate you. I know. And still you're not afraid? I'm terrified. She stood, clutching her father's journal to her chest. But I've been terrified for 3 years. At least now I'm terrified with purpose. She moved toward the door, then paused. Corvin? He looked up, and she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. something that made her heart stumble. Thank you for the library, for letting me come here tonight. The library was always meant for reading. He held her gaze. Come whenever you can't sleep. I often can't either. It wasn't an invitation to anything improper. It was something almost more dangerous, an invitation to connection. Sable nodded once and left, her father's journal pressed against her racing heart. 3 days until the ball. 3 days until everything became public. 3 days until she'd have to pretend that her feelings for Corvin Marchand were only performance. The lie was already becoming difficult to maintain. The Thornwood ball blazed with 1,000 candles, their light fracturing across crystal chandeliers and diamond-draped necks. Sable stood at the top of the grand staircase, her burgundy gown flowing around her like liquid fire. Stop fidgeting, Imogen murmured. You look magnificent. I feel like a fraud. Every woman here feels like a fraud. The trick is making everyone believe otherwise. Corvin appeared at her other side, resplendent in black. He offered his arm, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Remember, they're more afraid of you than you are of them. That seems unlikely. You publicly challenged a duke. Half of them are terrified you'll do the same to them. They descended together, and Sable felt the weight of 500 gazes pressing against her skin. Whispers erupted in their wake, a tide of speculation and scandal that followed them across the ballroom floor. The Ashford girl. Can you believe? Publicly accused him. And now she's on his arm. The Marchioness of Thornwood, their hostess, greeted them with barely concealed fascination. Your Grace, and Miss Ashford, what an unexpected pleasure. Lady Thornwood, Sable curtsied precisely, years of her mother's training guiding her movements. Thank you for including me this evening. Your home is extraordinary. How kind. The Marchioness's eyes flicked between her and Corvin, calculating. I must say, you've created quite the stir. Everyone is dying to know the true story behind your reconciliation. There's no story, Corvin said smoothly. Miss Ashford and I discovered we had more in common than either expected. Passion can take many forms, Lady Thornwood. Sometimes it begins as conflict. The Marchioness's eyebrows rose. Several nearby guests leaned closer, hungry for scandal. Sable's face warmed, but she kept her composure. His Grace exaggerates. We simply found mutual ground after an admittedly dramatic introduction. Mutual ground, the Marchioness smiled knowingly. How delightful. I do hope you'll save me a dance later, Miss Ashford. I'd love to hear more about this mutual ground. They escaped into the crowd, Imogen covering a laugh behind her fan. Passion can take many forms, Sable hissed at Corvin. Are you trying to start rumors? I'm trying to make this believable. A duke doesn't court a woman who publicly humiliated him unless the attraction is powerful enough to overcome pride. His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. Society loves a dramatic romance. Give them one. The orchestra began a waltz. Corvin turned to her, extending his hand. Miss Ashford, would you honor me with this dance? Every eye in the room watched as she placed her hand in his. They moved to the center of the floor, and for a moment, everything else faded. The whispers, the watching crowds, the calculated performance. It was just his hand at her waist, her palm pressed to his, and the music sweeping them into motion. You dance well, Corvin observed. My mother insisted on lessons even when we couldn't afford them. She said a lady's accomplishments were her armor. Your mother was wise. She was practical. Sable followed his lead, surprised by how naturally they moved together. She knew I'd need skills that didn't depend on fortune or family name. And now here you are, dancing with a duke. Something shifted in his expression. Do you ever wonder what she'd think of this arrangement? She'd think I was being reckless, possibly foolish. Sable met his eyes. She'd also understand why I said yes. Because of the debts? Because sometimes survival requires risks that look like madness from the outside. She paused, weighing her next words. She took a risk on my father. Everyone told her he wasn't suitable, that his charm masked weakness. She married him anyway because she believed people could become more than their circumstances suggested. Did she regret it? Never. Not even at the end, when we'd lost everything. Sable's voice softened. She said love wasn't about what you gained or lost. It was about choosing someone and refusing to unchoose them, no matter what. The waltz ended. They stood frozen for a moment, closer than propriety allowed, something unspoken humming between them. Then Lady Venetia appeared. "Your Grace." Her voice dripped with honey and venom. What a touching display. Though I do wonder if Miss Ashford knows the waltz is traditionally danced, with slightly more distance between partners. "Lady Venetia," Corvin's tone cooled noticeably. "I wasn't aware you were attending this evening." The Marchioness is a dear friend. She couldn't possibly exclude me. Venetia's gaze swept over Sable with deliberate contempt. That gown is quite bold. Burgundy can be so unforgiving on certain complexions. I appreciate your concern for my complexion, Lady Venetia, though I suspect you have larger concerns occupying your thoughts. Venetia's smile sharpened. Indeed I do. I'm concerned about the integrity of this season's social calendar. It seems anyone can purchase entry to the best events these days. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, how does it feel to wear dresses bought with your own family's shame? Does the silk feel different when you know it came from a duke's guilty conscience?" The words landed like a slap. Sable felt the blood drain from her face. "That's enough," Corvin said, his voice dangerous. "Is it? Because I've heard the most fascinating rumors about why you're really keeping her around." Venetia's eyes glittered. "Something about atonement for past mistakes? A pet project to assuage your guilt over what happened to her father?" Sable's heart stopped. "I wonder," Venetia continued, "does Miss Ashford know she's nothing more than an act of penance? A living monument to your guilt? How romantic." "You know nothing about this situation," Corvin said tightly. "I know you've never looked at me the way you look at her, and it's nauseating to watch." All pretense of civility dropped from Venetia's face. "Your grandmother chose me for you. Your family expects this match. And yet here you are, parading around with the daughter of a ruined gambler, pretending it means something." "It does mean something." "What? What could a penniless nobody possibly mean to a man like you?" The question hung in the air. Sable realized the entire ballroom had gone quiet, everyone straining to hear the Duke's response. Corvin turned to face Venetia fully, his expression carved from ice. "She means that for the first time in 3 years, I feel like something other than a title walking through empty rooms. She means that when I'm with her, I remember what it's like to be surprised, challenged, made to think about something beyond ledgers and duty." His voice dropped, but still carried in the silence. "You want to know what she means to me, Lady Venetia? She means everything you've never bothered to be. Genuine." Venetia's face went white, then red, her hands clenched at her sides. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "Both of you." She swept away, the crowd parting around her like water around a stone. Sable stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should be grateful for his defense. She should feel vindicated. Instead, all she could hear was Venetia's accusation echoing in her skull. A pet project to assuage your guilt, a living monument, an act of penance. Was that all she was? Sable. Corvin's voice was soft. "Don't listen to her. Is it true?" She turned to face him, searching his expression for something she desperately needed to find. Am I here because you feel guilty? Because keeping me close makes you feel better about what happened? That's not because I need to know, her voice cracked. I need to know if any of this is real, or if I'm just another asset you're managing, another debt you're trying to pay. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. I can't do this right now. She forced the words past the tightness in her throat. I need air. Please, just give me a moment. She fled before he could respond, weaving through the crowd toward the terrace doors, escaping into the cold night air where no one could see her face crumple. Behind her, 500 witnesses buzzed with new speculation. And somewhere in the shadows, Lady Venetia smiled. Sable avoided Corvin for 2 days. It wasn't difficult. Heartwood Manor was vast, and she'd spent her childhood learning its secret passages and hidden corners. She took breakfast in her room, occupied herself with Imogen during the day, and retreated to the attic in the evenings to sort through the boxes of her family's keepsakes that Corvin had preserved. Her mother's letters to her father were tied with faded ribbon. Her childhood drawings, clumsy and beloved. Her father's journals, recording years of ordinary happiness before the darkness crept in. She read them by candlelight and tried not to think about Venetia's accusations. A pet project, a living monument, an act of penance. On the 3rd evening, Corvin found her. She was sitting on a dusty trunk, her mother's wedding dress spread across her lap, when his shadow fell across the attic floor. He'd removed his jacket, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, and he carried a bottle of wine and 2 glasses as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Imogen told me where you'd been hiding. He set the wine on a nearby crate. She also threatened to lock us both in the cellar if we don't resolve whatever this is. There's nothing to resolve. You've been avoiding me since the ball. I've been processing information. Sable smoothed the yellowed lace of her mother's dress, not meeting his eyes. Venetia said some things that required consideration. Venetia said things designed to hurt you. That doesn't make them true, doesn't it? She finally looked up. You've never denied the guilt. You've never claimed this arrangement was about anything other than atonement. Corvin was quiet for a long moment. Then he lowered himself onto a trunk across from her, close enough to touch if either of them reached out. When I first acquired your father's debts, it was about guilt. His voice was measured, careful. I couldn't undo what Pemberton had done, but I could ensure his victims weren't destroyed completely. That was the calculation. And now? Now, I don't know what it is. He exhaled roughly, looking suddenly uncertain. You were supposed to be simple. A temporary arrangement to escape Venetia and satisfy my conscience simultaneously. Instead, you're complicated. Complicated. Infuriating. Surprising. Impossible to predict. His gray eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. You called me a vulture in front of 500 people, and I spent the entire night thinking about the way your voice shook with conviction. You negotiated terms with me like an equal, and I respected you for it. You sit in my library at midnight reading poetry, and I find myself looking forward to the sound of your footsteps in the hallway. Sable's breath caught. That's not penance, Corvin continued quietly. That's not guilt or obligation or atonement. That's something else entirely, and I don't know what to do with it. What do you want to do with it? The question hung between them, dangerous and inevitable. I want to stop pretending. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face close enough that she could count the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. I want this to be real, not performance. I want to know what you're thinking when you look at me across the dinner table. I want to understand why you stayed that first night instead of running. I stayed because I had no choice. You had choices. You chose the one that kept you near me. His hand reached out, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. Why? Sable swallowed hard. Because I wanted to understand you. because everyone said you were cold and calculating and heartless. But you kept my father's journals. You preserved my mother's roses. You looked at me in that ballroom like I was something more than a convenient solution. You were never convenient. His fingers finally brushed her cheek, feather light. You were chaos in a burgundy dress, and I haven't been able to think straight since. She should pull away. Should remind them both that this was temporary, that she was leaving at the end of the season, that there was no future in which a duke married a ruined merchant's daughter. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "Almost certainly. You're supposed to be pretending to court me, not actually. Not actually what? Looking at me like that. Like what? Like I matter." His other hand came up, cradling her face like she was something precious. "You do matter. That's the problem. You matter more than you should, more than makes any sense. And I don't know how to go back to pretending otherwise. Corvin, tell me to stop." His forehead pressed against hers, their breath mingling. "Tell me this is a mistake, and we should maintain proper boundaries, and I'll walk away right now. Just say the word." She should say it, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak of wanting something she could never have. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was nothing like she'd imagined a duke's kiss would be, cold and calculated and precise. This was heat and hunger, his hands tangling in her hair, her fingers gripping his shirt, both of them gasping into each other as if they'd been drowning and finally found air. He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, the wedding dress sliding forgotten to the dusty floor. His mouth traced a path from her lips to her jaw, to her throat, and she heard herself make sounds she'd never made before. "Sable," he breathed against her skin. "God, Sable. Don't stop." She pulled him back to her lips. "Please don't stop." They kissed until her mouth felt bruised and her heart threatened to burst from her chest. Until the wine sat forgotten and the candles burned low and nothing existed except the two of them in this dusty attic surrounded by ghosts of her past. "I should go," he murmured finally, though he made no move to leave. "If anyone finds us like this, I know. This changes things. I know that too." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his gray eyes soft in a way she'd never seen. "I meant what I said at the ball. You mean something to me. Something I didn't expect and don't fully understand. What do we do now?" "I don't know." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I know I don't want to go back to pretending. Neither do I." He kissed her once more, gentle this time, a promise rather than a declaration. Then he stood, straightening his rumpled clothes with hands that weren't quite steady. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll figure this out tomorrow. The Harrington Music Hall is in 3 days. We should discuss how to proceed. As genuine instead of performance? As whatever you'll allow us to be." He left, and Sable sat alone in the attic, her mother's wedding dress pooled at her feet, her lips still burning from his kisses. She picked up the dress carefully, smoothing the aged lace, and wondered what her mother would think of her now. Falling for the man who owned her family's shame, hoping for something that logic said was impossible. Love wasn't about what you gained or lost, her mother had said. It was about choosing someone and refusing to unchoose them. Had she chosen Corvin? Had she ever really had a choice? The questions followed her to bed, tangling in her dreams until she couldn't tell what was fear and what was hope. She woke to Thora's pale face and trembling hands. "Miss, you need to come downstairs immediately." The maid's voice shook. "There's been something happened. Lady Venetia arrived an hour ago with her father. And the Dowager. Miss, I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what? Thora, what's happened?" They're saying things. Terrible things about your family, about your father. Thora's eyes filled with tears. They've brought documents. Proof, they're calling it. That your father didn't just lose to Lord Pemberton. That he was cheating too. That the Ashfords were criminals as well as fools. The blood drained from Sable's face. That's not possible. My father never... They're demanding his grace and the arrangement immediately. They're saying he's been deceived, that you knew all along and were using him to cover up your family's crimes. The floor seemed to shift beneath her feet. 3 days. She'd had 3 days of hope, of possibility, of something that felt terrifyingly like love. And now it was all crashing down. The drawing room felt like a courtroom. Sable stood before them all. Lord Dunmore with his cruel smile, Venetia vibrating with triumph, the Dowager white-faced in her chair, and Corvin standing apart, his expression unreadable. The documents are quite clear. Lord Dunmore spread papers across the table with theatrical precision. Your father didn't just lose to Lord Pemberton. He was running a scheme of his own. Marked cards, loaded dice, a network of accomplices across 3 counties. He was caught, threatened with exposure, and agreed to lose everything rather than face prosecution. That's a lie. Sable's voice shook despite her efforts to control it. My father was many things, but he wasn't a criminal. The signatures are his. I've had them verified by 3 separate experts. Dunmore's eyes glittered with satisfaction. He signed confessions, Miss Ashford. Detailed confessions about exactly how his scheme operated. Confessions obtained under duress, under threat. Confessions nonetheless. Venetia stepped forward, unable to contain her glee. It seems the Duke has been harboring a criminal's daughter in his home, courting her publicly, defending her against people who tried to warn him. She turned to Corvin. You've been made a fool, Your Grace. She knew all along. She used your guilt over Pemberton to worm her way into your life. I didn't know. Sable's voice cracked. I swear to you, I didn't know any of this. How convenient. Dunmore gathered his papers. The daughter claims ignorance while the father's crimes go unexamined, a familiar pattern among the lower classes. That's enough. Corvin's voice cut through the room, sharp as a blade. For one desperate moment, Sable thought he was defending her, that he would throw these accusations back in their faces and stand beside her as he had at the ball. Then she saw his expression. Not angry, not protective, closed, calculating. The Duke of Ashworth assessing a situation that had become significantly more complicated. Leave us, he said. All of you. I need to speak with Miss Ashford alone. Venetia opened her mouth to protest, but her father gripped her arm. Of course, Your Grace. Take whatever time you need to process this revelation. They filed out. The Dowager paused at the door, her gaze meeting Sable's, with something that might have been pity. Then they were alone. Corvin, Sable began. Did you know? No. I swear to you I had no idea. These documents are authentic. I had my own solicitor examine them before this meeting. His voice was flat, emotionless. Your father confessed to running a cheating operation for at least 5 years before Pemberton caught him. Then the documents are forged. My father wasn't. Your father was a desperate man. Desperate men do desperate things. Corvin moved to the window, his back to her. I've spent 3 years atoning for my role in his downfall. 3 years, believing he was an innocent victim of Pemberton's schemes. And now you believe I'm part of some larger deception. I don't know what to believe. He turned, and his eyes held none of the warmth from the night before. Last night in the attic, was any of that real? Or was it simply the next stage of whatever game you're playing? The accusation hit her like a physical blow. How can you ask me that? After everything we what? Shared? Felt? His laugh was bitter. I've been manipulated by experts, Sable. By Pemberton. By business partners. By society matrons seeking my title. Forgive me if I'm cautious about accepting another tale of innocent attraction. This isn't a tale. This isn't a scheme. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I came here hating you. I stayed because I began to understand you. Last night happened because I have feelings for you that terrify me, not because I'm trying to manipulate you. Then explain the documents. I can't explain what I don't understand. Her voice broke. I don't know why my father signed those confessions. I don't know what happened before Pemberton. All I know is the father who taught me to read, who danced with my mother in the kitchen, who wept when he lost everything. That man wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was broken, sick, destroyed by something he couldn't control. Perhaps you only saw what he wanted you to see. Perhaps you're seeing what Venetia wants you to see. Sable stepped toward him, desperate to break through his coldness. Don't you find it convenient that these documents appeared now, right after you publicly humiliated her? Right after we complicated everything beyond repair? He shook his head. The timing is suspicious, yes, but the documents are real. My solicitor confirmed it. Your solicitor confirmed the signatures, not the circumstances under which they were obtained, not whether my father was threatened or coerced or given any choice at all. There's no evidence of coercion. There's no evidence it didn't happen either. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face despite her best efforts. You told me you spent 3 years trying to atone, that you kept everything my family owned because you felt responsible. Was that guilt, or was it something more? What do you mean? I mean, maybe you kept those things because some part of you knew this story was more complicated than it appeared. Maybe you preserved my mother's letters and my father's journals because you suspected there were answers buried in them. She wiped her eyes fiercely. If you're the man I've come to know, you don't make decisions based on surface evidence. You dig deeper. You look for the truth beneath the truth. He was silent for a long moment. Outside, a clock struck noon. I need time, he said finally, to investigate, to think. And while you think? While you investigate? What happens to me? He didn't answer. Sable felt something shatter inside her. The hope she'd been nurturing, the impossible belief that this could somehow work. It crumbled into dust. I see. She squared her shoulders, calling on every lesson her mother had ever taught her about dignity. I'll be gone within the hour. Sable, don't. She held up a hand. Don't pretend you want me to stay. Don't pretend last night mattered if you can doubt me this easily. I'm not doubting you. I'm being cautious. You're being a coward. The word hung between them, sharp as broken glass. Your grandmother told me you'd rather cut off your own hand than admit to vulnerability. I thought she was exaggerating. But here you are, faced with something real and frightening, and you're retreating into calculation. That's not fair. No, it isn't. She moved toward the door. None of this has been fair. Not what happened to my family, not what happened to yours, not whatever this was between us. But I thought you were different. I thought you understood what it meant to choose something, even when it didn't make logical sense. Sable, please. Goodbye, Corvin. She left without looking back. Thora helped her pack in silence, asking no questions, offering no comfort. Within an hour, Sable was in a hired carriage, watching Heartwood Manor disappear through rain-streaked windows. She'd arrived hating him. She was leaving with a broken heart and the terrible knowledge that she'd let herself love someone who couldn't trust her when it mattered most. The cottage in Devon was 3 days' travel. 3 days to rebuild the walls around her heart. 3 days to become someone who'd never been foolish enough to believe in fairy tales. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let herself weep. The cottage was smaller than she remembered. Sable had been home for 5 days when her mother found her in the garden, staring at nothing. Helena Ashford was thinner than she'd been a year ago, gray threading through her dark hair, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "You haven't told me what happened," Helena said, settling onto the bench beside her daughter. "But I've heard things. Letters from London. Gossip from the village." "What kind of gossip?" "That the Duke of Ashworth has gone quite mad. That he's broken with Lady Venetia publicly and spectacularly. That he's been investigating something that has Lord Dunmore very nervous." Helena studied her daughter's face. "That he's been asking about you." Sable's heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. "It doesn't matter, doesn't it? He thought I was part of a scheme. He looked at me like I was just another problem to solve. And that hurt you. I was foolish. I let myself believe something impossible." Helena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a letter. "This arrived this morning, from Hartwood Manor." Sable took the letter with trembling hands. The seal was Corvin's, pressed in deep blue wax. "Read it," Helena said gently. "Whatever it says, you need to know." She broke the seal. "Sable, I was wrong. Not cautious, not careful, not prudent. Wrong. I looked at those documents and chose to believe the worst interpretation, because believing the worst was safer than trusting what I felt. Your father's confessions were coerced. Pemberton threatened to destroy your mother's reputation, to claim she'd been his mistress, to ruin your brother's chances at any respectable future. Your father signed because he was trying to protect his family, not because he was guilty of anything except loving you all too much. I found the real evidence in his journals, the ones I kept because some part of me knew this story wasn't finished. He wrote everything down, every threat, every manipulation, every desperate choice. Pemberton was the criminal. Your father was his victim twice over. I've presented this evidence to the magistrate. I wagered my standing before the House of Lords to expose Dunmore. I staked my family's name against his in a public hearing that could have destroyed everything my ancestors built. Some called it reckless. I called it the only gamble worth making, the gamble for truth. Dunmore has been exposed as Pemberton's accomplice in fabricating the documents. Venetia is ruined. Your family's name is cleared. None of that matters as much as this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I retreated into calculation when you needed me to be brave. I'm sorry I let fear override everything I felt that night in the attic. You called me a coward, and you were right. I've been a coward since my father died, hiding behind duty and logic because feeling things meant I could be hurt. You broke through every wall I'd built, and instead of being grateful, I punished you for it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to return. But I need you to know that what happened between us was real. The most real thing I've felt in years. I'm coming to Devon, not to demand anything, not to negotiate terms, but to tell you this in person. You deserve that much. You deserve more than letters and apologies and the cowardice of distance. If you don't want to see me, tell the driver to turn back. I'll understand. But if there's any chance, any possibility that you might let me try to earn back your trust, I'll spend the rest of my life trying. Yours. In every way that matters. Corvin Sable looked up from the letter, her vision blurred with tears. He's coming here. He arrived an hour ago. Helena smiled softly. He's been pacing in the road, trying to work up the courage to knock on the door. I thought I'd give you time to read that first. You knew. He sent a letter ahead, asked my permission to speak with you. Helena touched her daughter's cheek. He's terrified, Sable. Terrified you'll refuse to see him. Terrified he's lost you. He should be terrified. Yes, he should. Helena stood, brushing off her skirt. The question is whether you want him to stay terrified, or whether you want to give him a chance to prove he's learned something. She left Sable alone in the garden, the letter clutched against her chest. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then Sable walked to the garden gate and opened it. Corvin stood in the road, exactly as her mother had described, pacing, disheveled. Nothing like the cold Duke who'd dismissed her from his drawing room. When he saw her, he stopped mid-step, his face a study in hope and terror. "You read the letter," he said. "I read it. I meant every word." "Did you?" "I've never meant anything more." He stepped closer, stopping just outside the gate. "I was wrong to doubt you, wrong to let my fear override everything I knew about who you are. You stood in my ballroom and challenged me when everyone else cowered. You negotiated with me like an equal when you had nothing. You showed me what courage looked like, and when you needed me to be brave in return, I failed you." "Yes." Sable's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "You did. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But I'm asking anyway." He dropped to his knees in the road, heedless of the mud. "Not as a duke, not as the man who owns your family's former home. Just as someone who loves you and will spend however long it takes proving it." Sable stared at him. "You love me? Desperately, inconveniently, completely." He looked up at her, all his armor stripped away. "I love your courage, and your fire, and the way you make me feel things I'd forgotten I could feel. I love that you see through my calculations to whatever's underneath. I love that you refused to let me retreat into safety. Corvin, tell me there's a chance, even a small one. Tell me I haven't destroyed this beyond repair." She opened the gate. He rose to his feet, uncertain, hopeful, nothing like a duke, and everything like a man in love. "You hurt me," she said. "You doubted me when I needed you most. I know. If you ever do it again, if you ever choose caution over trust when I need you, I won't." He took her hands, his grip warm and desperate. "I swear to you, Sable, I will choose you every time, even when it's frightening, especially when it's frightening." She looked at him, this complicated, infuriating, wounded man who'd somehow become essential to her, and made her choice. "Then we figure this out together," she said. "Whatever comes next." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her like she was air, and he'd been drowning. In the cottage window, Helena Ashford smiled and turned away to give them privacy. Some loves she knew were worth the risk. The Dowager Duchess arrived in Devon 2 days later. Sable found her in the cottage's small parlor, looking utterly out of place among the modest furniture and worn carpets. Meridia Marchand, in black silk and diamonds, examining a chipped teacup as if it might contain answers. "Your Grace." Sable paused in the doorway. "I didn't expect you. I didn't expect to come." The Dowager set down the cup carefully. "But certain situations require my attention, regardless of my preferences." "Has Corvin done something wrong?" "Corvin has done something unprecedented. He's informed me he intends to marry you, regardless of society's opinion, regardless of my blessing, regardless of every objection I might raise." The Dowager's eyes fixed on Sable's face. "I came to see for myself what kind of woman inspires such recklessness." "And what have you concluded?" "I've concluded that you've bewitched my grandson." A pause. "I've also concluded that it might be exactly what he needed." "You're not going to oppose this? Would it matter if I did?" The Dowager's lips twitched. "Corvin has made it abundantly clear that he will marry you with or without my approval. The question is whether I want to spend the rest of my life estranged from my only grandson, or whether I can accept that he's chosen differently than I would have chosen for him. That's very pragmatic. I'm a very pragmatic woman. The dowager leaned forward slightly. But I didn't come here only for pragmatism. I came because I was wrong about some things, and I owe you an apology. Sable blinked. An apology? I knew Dunmore's evidence was fabricated. I suspected it the moment he presented it. Shame flickered across the dowager's aristocratic features. But I allowed the accusation to stand because it served my purposes. I wanted you gone, and I convinced myself that the ends justified the means. You knew my father was innocent. I suspected. I should have spoken sooner. The dowager's voice hardened with self-reproach. Instead, I watched you walk out of Heartwood Manor with your heart broken, and I told myself it was for the best, that Corvin would recover and marry someone suitable, and everything would proceed as it should. But it didn't. No, my grandson went quite spectacularly mad instead. Refused to eat, refused to sleep, tore through every document in that house until he found proof of your father's innocence. The dowager shook her head. I've never seen him like that. Not even when his father died. He loves me, obviously, inconveniently, completely, to use his words. The dowager rose, moving to the window that overlooked the small garden. Your mother is out there. I remember her at 17, the most beautiful girl of our season. I told her she was making a mistake with your father. Told her charm wasn't enough, that she'd regret choosing passion over prudence. She never regretted it. I know. That's what haunts me. The dowager turned back, and her eyes held something Sable had never seen before. Vulnerability. I married for duty. My husband was suitable in every way, and I was miserable for 40 years. I told myself it was the price of responsibility, but perhaps it was simply the price of cowardice. Your Grace, I won't oppose this marriage. The dowager straightened, her armor sliding back into place. More than that, I'll support it publicly, vocally. Anyone who speaks against you will answer to me. Why? Because my grandson looked at me yesterday and asked if I wanted him to be as unhappy as I was. Asked if duty required suffering, or if perhaps I'd simply convinced myself it did, because the alternative meant admitting I'd been afraid. She smiled, thin and sharp. He has his father's cruelty when provoked, the ability to see exactly where the wound lies and press. That sounds like Corvin. It does. The dowager extended her hand. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Miss Ashford. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can be better, that I can support this marriage instead of undermining it. Sable looked at the offered hand, elegant, powerful, belonging to a woman who had caused her tremendous pain, but now stood offering peace. She took it. One condition, Sable said. Another negotiation? You truly are his match. Call me Sable. If we're going to be family, I'd rather we start on honest terms. The dowager's smile softened. Very well. Sable. She squeezed her hand once before releasing it. Welcome to the family. Such as it is. The Ashworth Ball was the event of the season. Not because of its grandeur, though Heartwood Manor had never looked more magnificent. Flowers cascading from every surface, candles burning in their thousands. The finest musicians London could provide filling the rooms with music. No, it was the event of the season, because everyone knew what was coming. Sable stood at the top of the staircase in a gown of deepest sapphire, diamonds at her throat, a wedding gift from the dowager herself. Her mother stood beside Imogen, both of them misty-eyed. Even her brother Everard had managed to stay sober for the occasion, looking almost respectable in borrowed evening clothes. Below, 500 guests waited, the same society that had watched her accusation, her courtship, her disgrace, and her redemption. Lady Venetia was notably absent, having retreated to the continent after her father's arrest. But everyone else was there, hungry for the final act of this extraordinary drama. Corvin waited at the base of the stairs. He wore black, as always, but tonight there was nothing cold about him. His eyes found hers across the crowded room, and he smiled. The real smile she'd learned to love, the one that transformed his face from marble to warmth. She descended slowly, savoring every step. When she reached him, he took her hand and raised it to his lips. "You look terrifying," he murmured. "Good. I love you." "I know." The orchestra began a waltz, but instead of leading her to the dance floor, Corvin turned to face the assembled crowd. "Before we begin," he announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "I have something to say." The whispers stopped, every eye fixed on them. 3 months ago, a woman walked into my ballroom and called me a vulture in front of everyone you see here tonight. He paused, letting the memory settle. She accused me of predatory practices, of feeding on her family's misfortune, of being everything contemptible about men with power and no conscience. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. She was partially right. Corvin's expression grew serious. I had acquired her family's debts for reasons that were not entirely noble. I had convinced myself that efficiency justified ruthlessness, that business was separate from morality, that feeling things was weakness. He turned to Sable, taking both her hands. "This woman taught me otherwise. She showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. She showed me that trust, once earned, is worth more than any fortune. She showed me that a life without love isn't duty, it's just emptiness." His voice dropped, but still carried in the perfect silence. "So tonight, in front of everyone who watched us clash and court and nearly destroy each other, I'm making a different kind of gamble. Not with cards or property or business deals." He released her hands and reached into his jacket, withdrawing a document heavy with seals. "This is the deed to Heartwood Manor. As of this moment, it belongs to Sable Ashford, soon to be Sable Marchant. Not as a gift or a condition or a debt, but as recognition that this was always her home, and I was merely keeping it safe until she returned." Gasps erupted through the ballroom. Sable stared at him. "Corvin, you can't." "I can. I have." He pressed the deed into her hands. "Whether you marry me tomorrow or change your mind entirely, this house is yours. Free and clear. No conditions." "That's not a gamble. That's madness." "Perhaps," he smiled. "But I told you once that passion takes many forms. Sometimes it begins as conflict. Sometimes it ends as trust." He dropped to one knee, right there in front of everyone. "Sable Ashford, I've gambled my reputation, my grandmother's approval, and now apparently my ancestral home on the belief that you might love me back. Will you marry me?" The ballroom held its breath. Sable looked at the deed in her hands, at the man kneeling before her, at the crowd waiting for her answer. She thought of her mother's words about choosing someone and refusing to unchoose them. She thought of all the walls she'd built and all the ways he'd broken through them. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times, yes. He surged to his feet, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her, while 500 people erupted into applause. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Imogen was crying openly, and the dowager was nodding with something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. "You realize," Sable whispered, "that you've just given me legal ownership of your home." "Our home," Corvin grinned. "And yes, that was the point. What if I'd said no? Then at least you'd have your family's legacy back." His expression softened. "Some things matter more than property, Sable. You taught me that." They danced the first waltz as an engaged couple, spinning through the crowd in the house that had seen her childhood, her loss, and now her triumph. And when the music ended, when the guests had been thanked and the candles burned low, they stood together on the terrace where she'd first fled from Lady Venetia's cruelty. Happy? Corvin asked. Terrified. She leaned into him. But the good kind. There's a good kind. The kind that means something worth protecting. She looked up at him. I never thought I'd say this to the man who bought my family's shame, but thank you. For not giving up. For choosing to be brave when it mattered. Thank you for making me want to be. 6 months later, the library at Heartwood Manor was warmer than it had ever been. Not from the fire, though that crackled cheerfully in the hearth. Warmer because it was full now. Sable reading in her favorite chair, Corvin pretending to work on estate business while actually watching her, Imogen sprawled on the carpet playing with the puppy she'd insisted they needed, and Helena visiting for the week, mending quietly by the window as she'd always done. I found something today, Corvin said, setting aside his papers. In your father's journals, another entry I'd missed. He handed her a page, carefully preserved, in her father's familiar handwriting. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want my children to know this. Love is not weakness. Love is the only strength that matters. I made choices out of fear, and I paid for them. But loving Helena, loving Sable, loving Everard, those were never mistakes. Those were the only things I ever did right. Sable's eyes filled with tears. He knew, she whispered softly. He knew what he was doing was for us. He loved you. That's what the journals prove more than anything else. Corvin took her hand. Whatever else happened, that was always true. She pressed the page to her heart, grateful beyond mere words. That night, as they sat together, watching moonlight silver the garden, Sable thought about how this story began, with hatred and accusation, with a borrowed dress and desperate courage. It had become something else entirely, something worth protecting, something worth the risk, something that felt remarkably, undeniably, completely like home. Thank you so much for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.